All right, a lot more coming up later in the week on UFC 283 at Anik Florian Pod on social media. If there is any topic that you would like us to dive further into later in the week during our second episode. But before we get on out of here, I would like to call on the executive producer of the Anik and Florian podcast, Cody Merrow. And before we get to your Merrow seconds, I just would like to acknowledge you publicly for all of your help with our transition. I know you've been essentially doing this 40 hours a week for the last 2 weeks to sort of help us navigate this. So just wanted to publicly thank you before you get to all the fucking shit that we missed over the last hour. So,
well, thanks. Hey, anything for the fans, you know, the fans are what we do this for. So that's who we're trying to feed back to. So one thing, just I have some other notes, but Kenny, can you imagine a Jamal Hill versus Johnny Walker title fight? Like, wouldn't that just be insane?
It would. I think that'd be very interesting. Johnny Walker's got some work to do, but I think he can. I think
they fought 11 months ago.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I think get back. Yeah,
right. Well, they
that was a brutal knockout.
Well, the promo.
Remember, it's like timber. Yeah.
Everything.
Oh, yeah.
So UFC 283 was the first UFC event back in Brazil with a crowd since November 2019. John, you were on that call. If my research is correct, your last time in Brazil was May 11th, 2019 for Andrade versus Namajunas, right?
Yes, right. The last time we had fans in Brazil, UFC 237. Yep.
Yeah, so at that fight, so since then, Jessica's fought 7 times. So that gives you kind of the sense for yourself, like when the last time you were in Brazil with the crowd was. So just what were your thoughts on the crowd? Just final notes there.
Yeah, I'm glad you're giving me a chance to sound off on this. And by the way, Andrade, in terms of the activity, I will say 2022, the only year since she signed with the UFC in which she hasn't competed at least twice. So look for a busy 2023 for Jessica Andrade. But no, there was a time in my life, as Kenny knows, that I was going to Brazil 6 times a year to these remote locations, Jaraguá do Sul, traveling from Las Vegas, away from my family, non-air conditioned venues, main cards at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't get back to the States fast enough. But have this little breather to come back to Rio for this pay-per-view with this backdrop and this setting. It was absolutely incredible. I've never been this excited to come to Brazil. Not that I'm not excited to get back to the U.S. tomorrow, but no, I mean, it was absolutely insane, them stomping their feet and creating all of this noise. I mean, they really do unite as one underneath that roof, and it was a special night.
And how's that Brazilian acai, dude? It's totally different in Rio or Brazil than it is in the States, right? It's delicious.
I am going to be done with you guys in 5 minutes. I'm going to go do some recreational drugs with Bruce Buffer, and then I'm going to go get some acai. Everything's different about it. And I live in Florida, Kenny, right? And I know you experienced some pretty good acai in California. I live in Florida where actually a lot of Brazilians try very hard to do acai well, and it's not the same at all. The consistency, the color, not even close. So yes, we are off to get some acai. Can you
bring some back? Can you bring some back in the suitcase? Is that going to melt everywhere all over your suit? Just bring some back, bro, Florian.
It'll probably mesh nicely with Glover's blood all over my green suit. But yeah. What else you got, Cody?
Well, and way to blow the news on the fact that the 3 of us and Bruce are opening up a dispensary / acai shop in Boca Raton, Florida. So way to break the press release there, John. Thanks. So continued notes, fight of the night was Jamal Hill and Glover Teixeira. Also Ismael Bonfim and Jailton Almeida. You said you're going to get more Bonfim later in the week, so I won't go into anything more there.
So Ismael Bonfim obviously got the bonus, but Gabriel did not.
Correct, on the record at least.
Yeah. So, discretionarily, obviously, Gabriel Bonfim is going to be taken care of. A little surprised to see Jailton Almeida get a bonus, but good on him nonetheless.
So more notes, just one last note on Andrade. 231 significant strikes for her is a UFC flyweight record. It was the second largest for a 3-round fight behind Diaz versus Cerrone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so
she's awesome.
I also believe, per the notes that I was reading on Sherdog, was that she's the only fighter to have eclipsed 200 significant strikes twice in her career in a 3-round fight. So she's insane.
She's unbelievable.
So that is a flyweight record. And last week, we did break some news, but Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso was also broken for the co-main event for March 4th. So a big fight in the flyweight division coming up. Do you venture a guess, Kenny, on what the odds are for that on DK Sportsbook?
I'd say Shevchenko, probably like 5-1, 6-1?
Yeah, minus 600. That's why Kenny gets paid the big bucks.
Yeah, I rarely get those right, but I'll take it.
So just to continue along those lines, early line movement, John Jones, when the fight broke, was an underdog. He's now moved. He's now minus 120 for UFC 285.
Wow.
So, quick line movement, some smart plays there. I know I'm one of them, so I had to get on that dog money. More line movement. Kamaru Usman, the odds did come out on DK Sportsbook, minus 245 versus Leon Edwards, plus 205 for that rematch. Surprise there, John?
Interesting.
That's very interesting. Kenny, in terms of that trilogy fight between Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, so Gilbert Burns is still working with Kamaru Usman a little bit here and there. But Gilbert Burns this week in Rio was asked about that trilogy fight and who he thought would win it. And he said, with an argument largely rooted in the altitude in Salt Lake City, he's picking Leon Edwards because he said Leon Edwards got off to a great start in the altitude. Then he feels like that affected him in the middle rounds. And then obviously we all know what happened in the fifth round. But I'm so curious for our fighter meeting with Leon Edwards. So I can say, so I think we want to have that conversation. Why was the performance so listless in rounds 2, 3, and 4? Do you have answers internally as to why you couldn't get off at all for major portions of that fight? But I did think it was interesting that Gilbert Burns talked a lot about the altitude and went on record as saying he thinks Leon wins the third meeting.
That's very interesting, and that's totally feasible because it seemed like he didn't have that same kind of spunk. He didn't have that same kind of energy moving around the octagon that you typically see from him. Footwork, huge part of the game, obviously. Huge part of the game for Leon Edwards, who is a very sophisticated fighter and has a lot of skills. So, something to think about.
Yeah,
wow,
I think so.
Well, and interesting, too, because everyone wanted to jump right to Kamaru's outside of the octagon things to blame they're like, oh, he's not focused. He's going Black Panther, which comes out on Disney Plus in a couple of days, cheap plug. Yeah. But interesting to say the least. Minus 245 on DK Sportsbook. So
I'm not sure I've ever been more interested to have a fighter meeting than when we sit down with Leon Edwards in England, just to try to get some answers as to how they felt about the totality of that fight.
Right.
John, gun to your head, fish and chips or acai?
Acai, just because you're asking me today, but I'm a big fried food guy, so I don't know.
Yeah, we know, Chost. We know. Shout out, Jay.
Yeah.
No Cody's cover this week, but if you watch Remember the Show, which we've had over 100 UFC athletes and now have, our first homegrown champ in Jamal Hill, huge Remember the Show staple. I did give out Burns to win by finish in round 1 and the under 1.5.
That's
for
right.
Walker versus Craig. So fade me at your own peril. I'm just saying.
Mero's on fire in the DraftKings Sportsbook. Got to get that going in Florida. All right, that is going to do it for this episode, but not for this week. As you know, the Anik and Florian podcast throughout 2023, not 1, but 2 episodes a week. And our next episode will probably drop on the DraftKings YouTube channel on Thursday. Clips on our socials as well as the Anik and Florian podcast channel. Also, don't forget, Remember the Show is back this Thursday with Bilal Muhammad and Jason Anik, and we will be live later this week with Coach Santino DeFranco, Brian Petrie, as we continue the UFC 283 conversation and get to anything else that materializes in the MMA stratosphere over the next 48 hours. Thank you to our executive producer, Cody Merrill. Thanks to Ray Longo. From my man, Kenny Florian, Jon Anik signing off from Rio de Janeiro. We'll talk to you in a few days. Until then, yo fucking later.